sometimes it's just a lack of preparation. And if we prepared ourselves and said, this is what we really expect in the next 90 days, we do such a better job of setting ourselves up for success.
Adam, welcome to episode 4.
Hey, David. Good to see you, man.
It's good to see you.
We're here.
We got some coffee in us.
Yes,
we're
it
ready
always
to go.
helps.
That's
Always
right.
helps.
That's right. Well, welcome everyone to the RevOps Recruiters podcast. Today is episode 4. Our mission here is to provide insights and best practices around finding, hiring, and retaining top revenue operations talent.
Exactly.
What are we going to talk about today, Adam?
Well, first of all, we're your hosts, Adam and David from RevSearch.
That's right. That's right.
But yes, what we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk about why expectation alignment in RevOps matters.
Oh, that's a great topic. So we're going to break this topic down into 3 specific areas. First is going to be expectations during the hiring process. The next is going to be expectations in the first 90 days.
Yep.
And then expectations for the long haul.
Yeah, for sure. You know, it's interesting. Sometimes we think expectations, yeah, they play a role. They're important. But how important are they really? The reality is that there's been a number of studies done where when you think about satisfaction, or in this case, dissatisfaction of employees within an organization, what are the main contributing factors? I think most people would go to initially saying, well, people are underpaid, overworked, or the person that they work for is a monster. Right. And that's got to be the reason why they're leaving, that's why they're not staying, right? But the reality, the research has shown that one of the top contributing factors actually has nothing to do with those first 3. It has to do with whether they have either clear expectations or those expectations are constantly changing. And so if you're looking to retain, right, part of our mission of why we do this podcast is help you retain top revenue operations talent. If we're looking to retain them, then expectation alignment is a huge part in how we ensure that we can keep the folks that we have on our team there and with us.
Exactly. Alignment is really one of the major goals of the RevOps role.
Yeah.
So how do we align as a company to ensure that the RevOps role can actually make an impact?
Isn't that the irony, right? If we align across all the teams, but hey, we didn't align the expectations. So yeah, you nailed it.
All right. Well, let's dive in. The first area that we're going to unpack is expectation alignment during the hiring process, and specifically the sub bullet under that, a backfill of a previous role.
Yeah, so really when you're thinking about hiring somebody, there's only really 3 scenarios in which we're hiring someone into our organization. Number 1 is we're replacing somebody. It's a backfill. It's a role we've already had, but we need to fill that role because the person who was there has already left. Second scenario would be that we're hiring our very first person. We've never had this title before. We're hiring it for the first time. And then third is that we're hiring someone to be a part of a team that already exists. So
mature.
That's
RevOps
right.
function.
That's right. We're growing it. So for the first one, talking about a backfill, I think there's a few things that we can do as an organization, as a company, to really prepare ourselves well for rehiring that role. And I think the first thing that we want to ask ourselves is, why did that person leave? Yeah. We had somebody here. Why are they not here anymore? And it's easy oftentimes for us to go, well, look at what they maybe did wrong, or how they weren't able to contribute in a high level way, and look at that individual. But if we can turn that camera around and really take an introspective look at ourselves and say, we were definitely contributors to this relationship, right? It wasn't all one-sided. What were the scenarios? What were the environments that caused this person to be unhappy? And not every time. Sometimes people just get hired away because they're really good and they get a better offer.
Exactly.
But many times there's things that we can look at. And so we really want to turn that camera around to ourselves and say, why did that person leave and what can we do about it?
Yeah. Very important step is, it's going back into the proactive step of saying, okay, let's not repeat the same mistake.
Yeah, for sure.
We're, and like you said, looking at ourselves and going, as an organization, where have we fallen short in this? What could we have done better? And then assessing the skill set of the individual. Are there some data points to support gaps, and really taking the time? I think that's the key thing, is hitting the pause button. I think a lot of times the need for fast growth and continuing on, going 100 miles an hour, it's easy to just go, open the rec, let's fill it, let's backfill as fast as possible, and nobody's thought about why didn't this work, this relationship?
Yeah, and they may be freaking out, right? Because this person came in and like walked out, or they gave you just a 2-week notice. It's like, oh my gosh, how are we going to survive without this? But doesn't have to be a long period of time, but it needs to be intentional work. Then the other thing is that you actually they've given you something beautiful by that role being open and up again. You've got the ability to look at it and say, what's the exact skill set that we need? Mm-hmm. What might be different? You mentioned that.
Right.
What about from a leadership standpoint? Did that person that we had before, did we give them a platform for leadership, but it was too big for that person? Or was the person too much of a leader? We really needed someone who is a little more tactical and just wanted to get things done, right? So you can reassess that. And you can also make sure that, hey, what is the culture of this team or this organization? And is this person the right culture fit? So sometimes we need to look at it and say, okay, this person's gone. That's bad. But how do we take advantage of this opportunity and make it even better going forward?
That's right. Excellent. So the next bucket under there is the first hire in revenue operations. So, maybe a company has never had this role in the organization before. They're trying to get an understanding of what to do. What are some of the key things we want to look at when it's our first hire?
Yeah, I think the first thing that we should be looking at, and we talked a little bit about this on one of our previous podcasts, but really, what are we expecting out of this role? What are we hoping to be the impact from this individual? And the more time that we put into that, and we're really assess what we hope to get out of it, the more clear picture we can paint for the candidates as we begin to talk to them. So I think it's important for us to look at that and say, what are we hoping to get out of this role? Then even more closer to that is, okay, if we want all of these things out of this role as a whole, what do I really expect to get out of them in the first 90 days? Right? Clarify that, look at, and make sure it's realistic, right? We're all about, yes, we want to push and we want to stretch and we want to try to be our best, but let's have a clear expectation of what can we get out of that individual in that first 90 days.
Yeah, that step in the process helps us so much as recruiters.
Yeah,
too,
for sure.
When we're doing discovery and we're meeting with a company around this hire and trying to do some of that initial discovery, those first 90 days are critical for several reasons. But one of them is getting the narrative right and identifying some of those key projects. You're not going to forecast what's going to happen in the next 5 years with this role, but first 90 days is a really good time frame to identify some key things that we want to achieve, and that helps the candidate go, yeah, this is realistic, and there's a little bit of a checks and balances there of, all right, let's talk about this. This gives us some things to talk about, set expectations.
Exactly. Yeah, so, I think it's huge, and you're right. I mean, many of the companies that we're working with, they don't have a crystal ball. They don't know what's going to happen a year from now or 5 years from now. However, we can certainly look and say, this is what we expect to accomplish in 90 days.
Yes.
And barring something catastrophic, we all know what happened in March of 2020, right? No one had any idea that was coming. So sometimes you have to have that happen.
Right.
But sometimes it's just a lack of preparation. And if we prepared ourselves and said, this is what we really expect in the next 90 days, we do such a better job of setting ourselves up for success.
That's it. Then the next scenario under the hiring process, we had adding to an existing team.
Yeah.
So now you've got a more mature function. Maybe they're already running on all cylinders, and you're adding someone into a potential more mature RevOps team.
Yeah, and this a lot of time happens because you need more bandwidth from the team, right?
Capacity.
There's more capacity. There's more that needs to be done, and it can't all be accomplished with who you have there. And so there's a few things that I think you can do initially to get ready. And the first thing I'd say is, if you're hiring this new role, what's the role that they're going to play on this team, right? And how's that dynamic going to work? They're probably going to be taking some of the workload off of some other folks. And so what's getting shifted over? What's moving? What's staying with other folks? And just get a plan of where they're going to seat, who they're going to be reporting to, just being ready for how they're going to fit into the team. The last thing you want is to bring someone new, to use a sports analogy, bring somebody completely new into a clubhouse and have no idea what role they're going to play. Just say they're talented, so we brought them to the team, but we don't really know what role they're going to play. Make sure it's very clear what role they're going to play.
Yeah. Excellent. Yeah, and I think it makes it a little more interesting when you have an existing team, or maybe you have a legacy, team with some siloed folks, maybe in operations, coming in and really doing that exercise again of looking at, okay, where are we today? what has been that journey up until this point? Where are we trying to go with this function? What are we trying to do? And how is this leader going to fit in? We've heard different scenarios of, companies hiring a senior leader above more tactical individuals,
right,
and trying to figure out, okay, with this existing team, what are our gaps? We're lacking something here. We're lacking this end-to-end alignment, and looking at what does this leader need to bring to the table. Maybe we've got some really great talent on some teams, right, across this function, but what are we looking for in this leader? And then vice versa, if you're bringing in a tactical person, what is that tactical person going to do? How is it going to fit into the overall? What are the needs of this function? What are the biggest gaps? And I guess bottom line is planning it out.
Yeah, planning it
out.
And another factor I think you should think about when you're talking about a team dynamic is, what involvement is the team going to have in the hiring process? Predetermine that. Figure out what that's going to look like, right? So is everybody going to be part of interviewing this individual,
right,
this new role? Is just the leader responsible for that? And just have a strategy, have a plan going into it of what that's going to look like.
Yep, exactly. So why do we do all the pre-work above?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of this is work, right? Before the hire, you've got some work that you get. But is there a purpose to it? Is there a reason why? And yes, we would say there is a purpose to it. And it's really to allow yourself to have a very clear picture of the role and the expectations. And here's why it's important. Use that to communicate it to your potential candidates or to your potential employees, right? The folks that you're interviewing. Communicate it. I think sometimes the temptation is, as an organization, is, well, if I communicate all of this, if I'm very clear, that might turn some people off. That might get them in a situation where they don't feel like, hey, this is the right role for me. Mm-hmm. As someone who we've helped lots of people hire, we'd much rather figure that out before we hire that person than 30, 60, 90 days into that hiring journey or into that, that journey as a new employee. And so the more that you can define this and then communicate it and then stick to it, it may make the hiring process a little more challenging because you may have to go through a few more candidates to get there. But the likelihood of you landing on the right candidate and that candidate being a good fit is so much better.
Yeah, that relationship between interviewing and if you've done the work, you've got a clear picture, and therefore you can present that clear picture to a candidate, which immediately builds trust in the hiring process, in the interview process. If you're sitting there as a hiring manager and you have no idea even why you're hiring this role, and you're kind of throwing different key terms at this individual and saying, well, we need all our systems fixed.
Right.
But if you have that clear picture and you can present and have a good conversation with this individual, it's going to go a long way.
Yeah.
And that person coming into the role is going to go, yeah, this makes a lot of sense. The company has thought about it, and maybe they have some additional things to share about it, but it presents that clear picture, that narrative, and therefore a higher chance of success in hiring.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the temptation sometimes is that we want to hire somebody because of maybe what they've done in the past, or they interview great. They seem like an awesome person, somebody that you really like. You're like, hey, I'd love to hang out with this person.
Hang out with them, yeah.
I think they'd be a great kind of culture fit. But yet, if you haven't done the work of defining exactly what you expect from that individual, then you may end up hiring a great person for the wrong role. However, if you do this work, it kind of provides you with this decision matrix, this interviewing matrix that allows you to say, do they check at least the minimum number of boxes, but hopefully most of the boxes of what we're looking for. Right. Yeah, so do the work for that.
Absolutely. Especially in a very complex role like this. I think that, the practice of having an interview matrix, I think that's best practice anyway, especially with so many hard skills and soft skills and different maturities on the organizational side. You might be, there's so many different scenarios that we've seen of where companies are, what they're focusing on, what their priorities are, and all of that influences that matrix. All of that influences that matrix. So
absolutely.
It's a great one. All right, so let's go back to big picture on this one. The second topic that we wanted to focus on around alignment is expectation alignment during the first 3 to 6 months. So now we've hired an individual.
The person. Yep.
They're starting to chip away. They're starting to make some progress in the role. 3 to 6 months.
Yeah. So first thing that I would say is that, and you and I both have stories, and we'll share a few stories. We'll have story time here in just a minute.
Yeah.
But what happens during the very first week for that new hire goes a long way for setting the expectations, right?
Yeah.
And so you've got to be really intentional that you're ready for this person, that you're setting up the expectations again, clarifying those. And I think you've even got a story about an experience that you had that wasn't so great in that first week.
Yeah, absolutely. Coming in, and we see this on LinkedIn, people posting about, having to sit down and watch 3-hour videos on how a system works. Everyone that comes into a new role longs for connection. They want to belong. They want to be seen and heard.
Yeah.
And a lot of that has to do with planning out that initial phase of onboarding, right? The initial onboarding process is so critical. So in my own experience, I've come into a role before where in office, open floor plan, shown my desk, given that 2-3 hour video.
Right.
And then I proceeded to go back and forth from the coffee, from the coffee maker to my desk and having very little interaction.
Nobody knew who you were.
People wondering,
why is this guy here?
Who's this person? Me wondering, how do I fit into this larger team, this large, less upfront work on actually setting expectations.
Yeah.
The only thing that was good is I was pretty good at my job, so I could jump in pretty quickly.
Right.
But just this feeling of feeling so disconnected early on.
Sure.
To your point of, we need to have a plan, we need to have steps, triggers, and we need to involve people and have intentional one-on-one group setting time to really allow this person to get there, allow this person to have a good arrival.
I mean, I think the reality is you need to make this person a priority.
That's it.
Make sure they matter. One of the things that I would say, and this is easy to do as long as you're planning for it, but be ready for them on day one. If they need to have a laptop, have the laptop there ready for them.
Yeah.
With their already got everything ready to go. If they're remote, ship it to them. Get it to them. You're going to have to ship it at some point. So ship it early enough that it shows up in time that they have it on day one. If you've got an IT department and they need login access, get them have their email set up. Make them feel like they matter, that them showing up is a priority. And then really anything that they're going to need to begin to participate, have it ready for them because you want them involved. You want them to feel like this role matters to this organization so much so that they are ready for me when I stepped into it. They were prepared for me when I got there. And then really you've done the hard work we just talked about earlier about planning out what your expectations are for the first 90 days. So communicate that again, right? Unpack it. Say, hey, this is where we're going. This is what we're hoping to accomplish. This is what success is going to look like over the next 90 days. And then establish a communication rhythm. This is how often we're going to meet. We're going to meet daily initially, and then we're going to rotate after the first 2 weeks. We're going to go to every other day, whatever that looks like, but have some kind of communication rhythm. And then the last thing I'd say around that would be, if you're talking about 90 days as your window for looking at how this role is successful, then set a conversation, put it on the calendar for 90 days from now that says, hey, on this date at this time, we're going to sit down and review these expectations that we've had and really see how we made progress.
Yeah. In our experience here, talking to candidates, and I can think of endless stories here. We don't have time to go into everything, but we've got so many candidates that come into these roles, and we hear those stories because we get an opportunity as recruiters to listen in and really get some of those insider scoops. But getting to the role and lacking what you just explained, the clear expectations up front, you get into the role, you're trying to make an impact. That's every person that we place. They want to make an impact as an individual, unless you're totally on the other spectrum,
right?
And that you're your own. That's a whole different story. Sure. But you're looking to make an impact, and so that those 90 days, those expectations, those projects, those main things to focus on, having those communicated, and then reviewing them as you go. That ensures success. It's nothing. The worst case scenario is you're coming into a role. You start to build some things, you're starting to solve some problems, you're on an island, nobody's talking to you, and then you come to leadership for the first time, and you go, that's not what we wanted.
Yeah.
All of this is expectation alignment. That's
Yeah.
why this matters so
Yeah.
much.
Yeah, for sure. And I think when people walk into these new roles, they're trying to figure out how do things work around here, right? They have a little bit of the expectation that you've painted during the hiring process, but now they're really looking at it and saying, okay, you said you were whatever. Are we actually? Right? And so they're beginning to build an understanding of how things work within the organization. And so the more you have a structure that supports what you hope to accomplish, the more likely you are to actually get there. And so being prepared for that individual. It's funny, I've got a story from my experience. This was a number of years ago. I just started in a company, and the first project that I was given was to redo a piece of marketing for us, right?
Right.
And I hired an outside agency to help us with it. I had a timeline that was very quick, but I committed to it. I said yes to this timeline. My leadership asked me, and I said, yep, we can do it in that timeline.
Right.
I got a commitment from the team that I was working with. We get to about 3 days before the project is due, and the team that I was working with said, we're not going to be able to deliver. And so I went back to my leaders and said, hey, here's the deal, guys. We're going to be behind. And my leader looked at me and said, no, we're not. Find a way. Find a way. Now, little history. He's a Marine, and he had a little bit different way of thinking about things. But what I realized in that moment, this is 2 weeks in, I realized, oh, that's how things work around here. We figure out a way. We get things done. And sure enough, I found another way, found someone else to work with us on the project. We got it done. We shipped it, and that marketing served us really well for years and years and years to come. But I had this picture of how things may or may not work.
Right.
And I learned that day, oh, that's how things work today.
Yeah.
Or that's how things work within this organization. So the expectations that we create with those folks early in those first 30, 60 days, 90 days will help you set up their entire kind of experience with your organization from that point forward.
And this is really the best practice, right? Best case scenario, we see the spectrum is pretty wide in the types of organizations we've dealt with. We haven't seen perfect yet.
Yeah.
But I think these are really good things to strive for.
Yeah.
It's really healthy to do these things. And retention, we always talk about retention. We want to keep people in. Well,
yeah.
This is the, retention is the tip of the iceberg. All of what we're talking about is
the work
below
that leads to retention.
below the water.
Yeah.
All the work, all the steps that need to be taken to ensure this long-term success and retention.
Sure.
All right, so the next bucket and the area that we want to talk about around expectations is long-haul success. So we've had the first 90 days, 3 to 6 months. Now we're looking at long-haul success and retention, and we've got some frameworks that we've
Yeah, I mean, I think that's important, right? To first of all establish some kind of framework, right? Mm-hmm. Usually that's around objectives, key results, key indicators of whether those objectives are likely to be reached, communication, cadence of accountabilities, things like that, right? And so it doesn't matter. There's a lot of good ones out there, right? We've talked about OKR, we've talked about GROW, 4 disciplines of execution.
That's right.
There's probably dozens. There's probably ones I've never even heard of, right? It doesn't matter which one you use, but use one of them.
Yeah.
Go and find one. Don't feel like you got to reinvent the wheel. Go find something. Make sure everybody understands how that framework works, and then use it and stick to it.
Yeah.
It'll be tempting at times to say, we don't have time this week to do that thing, so let's just put it off to next week. No, stick to the framework. Have the meetings, communicate, see what's happening, ensure that there's progress occurring, and if you stick to it, I think it'll serve you well in the long run.
First word that comes to mind is trust.
There you go.
Trust is the outcome of properly executing something like this. Using a framework to say, hey, we're not just gonna take a swing at this thing and see where we go, but we're gonna slow down and we're gonna put a plan together. We're gonna identify, clearly communicate what are our objectives, what are we trying, what is the major goal, and then how are we gonna build out a process on how to execute and how to actually reach that goal, and then consistently communicate, have that cadence, have that communication. I think about that. We do that in our company.
Sure.
We do that at RevSearch. We we meet and we talk about what's working, what's not working.
Sure.
On a weekly basis, because things change on a weekly basis.
Right.
There's fires, there's new things, new projects that happen. And so the only way to stay in the know is to actually sit down and have those intentional conversations where you can be transparent and then foster a culture of transparency,
Yeah.
right? And not have your arms crossed,
Sure.
right? We've seen that too. That's more of an EQ thing on a leadership side,
Sure.
right? I think those different things, if you can combine those and you can successfully deploy something like this, it'll lead to success.
Yeah, for sure. And you kind of mentioned in there clear lines of communications. I heard somebody say something once that stuck with me. They said, no is better than no answer. So in other words, if the answer is no, meaning, is this project ready to go? Have we completed this task? Are we ready to? If the answer is no, telling someone the answer is no is better than giving them no answer. Because anytime there's no answer, trust begins to break down.
Yeah.
So keep communication open. If timelines change, communicate it.
Yeah.
If priorities change, communicate it. If a roadblock has been hit, a challenge has been reached, communicate it. Yeah. Right? Over communicate it. Keep the leadership informed in every project. Right? If I'm a RevOps leader and I'm working on stuff, I'm going to keep them updated. I'm going to let them know. And if there becomes a situation where I'm overwhelmed with too many priorities or too many tasks, too many requests, then I'm going to go to the leader and I'm going to say, hey, help me determine. I think I know what's priority here, but let me make sure we're on the same page. Yeah. And having visibility and having those that clear picture into what's going on creates better expectations, and those expectations turn into alignment and turn into trust.
Yeah. And talking about real examples here of stories that we hear stories on both sides, right? The candidate didn't initiate those conversations. They were not proactive from the client side. We've heard that.
Yeah.
We've heard it from the candidate side saying, I can't move the needle.
Right.
There's lack of communication. I can't get through.
Right.
So it's really a balance between the two here. We're not saying one party in this equation is more at fault than the other or more responsible. It's an equal. It's a partnership.
Yeah.
And so we have to be partners in this. We have to be partners in managing those expectations. Driving those conversations, initiating, because really it is more. It's all about being proactive. If you're reactive in revenue operations, I mean, that's not going to take you to that ultimate goal.
Sure.
You have to be proactive, and in this case, communicate.
Yeah. So for sure. And I think the kind of the last thing I would say about expectations is having alignment there really should lead to results. It should lead to execution. I've seen scenarios where people have been stuck in ideation, they're stuck in meetings, they're stuck in conversation around what they should be doing, rather than being focused on saying the reason we're establishing these expectations is so that we can ultimately execute and drive results.
Yeah.
And so if we're looking for long-term retention, if we're looking for someone to be satisfied in their role, both leadership in the individual as well as individual in the company and the leadership, is that there should be results, there should be execution, there should be output that's occurring.
Yeah. Next steps. It's nothing like being in a meeting and going, this is the same meeting we had 3 weeks ago.
That's right.
4 weeks ago. We're doing the same thing. We're throwing out amazing ideas, but we're not actually taking action on any of these. And so, to your point, having those meetings and making those efficient, right? I mean, that's another piece of, are we meeting for an hour every week, but that hour is not really giving us the outcomes that we're looking for? How can we structure this meeting to be more effective?
Yeah.
And there's also some methodologies around that.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah, for sure.
Well, excellent.
Yeah.
So let's round it out. I mean, I think the last bullet here.
I guess if you're talking about, the last thing we've got on here is that if you're talking about how to retain, protect, keep this person engaged, right, with expectations, is be careful not to relegate this individual to the lowest common denominator. They're not IT support. They're not. Let them do work that really drives revenue, that drives the functions of the various revenue teams, go-to-market teams forward, and just be careful as a leader to protect that.
Yeah,
and give them space to do that work.
That's right. And we're not saying this leader is going to be only only going to be strategic. And that's the conversation we constantly have with our clients is, what does this role really look like? Well, it's in the middle. It's really in the middle when you have strategy and tactical. We don't want them to be the back office admin. It's just doing, support tickets and not actually chipping away and building a system that's scalable.
Right.
But we also, in a lot of cases, depending on the growth stage, we don't want someone who's just going to be strategic and wanting to lead people.
Yeah.
Ultimately, so it's finding that balance of how can we free this person up to do the right things?
Yeah.
What are the right things that we need to do?
Sure.
Well, this was an incredible, great conversation.
Yeah,
in
absolutely.
episode 4.
Yeah. Well, thanks for, again, listening in, folks. We appreciate you guys being there. Hopefully this is something that is helpful to you as you're building expectations for your team and really looking to not only find the right folks, but keep them in your organizations for a long time. So we hope you'll subscribe, you'll like things, you'll follow it, and we'll be here next week. So looking forward to our conversation.